Hey, it's Sylvan, and this is the Handpan Podcast. The benefits of creativity are undeniable. Using our imagination to create something reduces stress, teaches us problem solving, fosters community, and on and on. Yet, it often takes people to meet us where we're at and to empower us to pursue the creative inkling inside each of us. Today, we're going to hear from one of these people. I met Mary Mosley at a recent handpan gathering, and I immediately knew I wanted to share her story on the podcast. Mary talks about the freedom found in the handpan after going through painful experiences which made it difficult to create for years. And she reveals what she's learned from routinely bringing the handpan to the most unusual setting, the classroom. Here's my conversation with Mary Mosley. Hey, Mary. It's good to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Hello. I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting for me too, because it's an aspect of the instrument that I don't have much experience in. So I expect to learn a lot from you today.
Yay.
So we'll get to your occupation in just a moment because it's going to be a central focus in today's conversation. But first, I wanted to ask you about your background. Specifically, growing up, did you have experiences around creativity and art and community that set you on the path towards pursuing an instrument like the handpan?
Absolutely. I was very lucky to grow up in a home with a lot of music. My father was a guitarist and a beautiful singer, and my mother is a classically trained pianist. And so they both played instruments and played them often, and were also just lovers of music. And so I remember as a child, these parties that my parents would throw, and they loved rock music. And my dad had an amazing record collection, and they would let me pick records. And so, I was like 4 or 5 and, dancing to the Rolling Stones on top of the coffee table and things like that. So
Yeah.
it was very much a childhood that was musical. I also sang as a child. I sang a lot for my church and in choirs at school and things like that. And that part of me, the creative part of me, was something that was very encouraged by my parents, especially. I sang. I didn't pick up an instrument. I sang a lot, and I drew. I liked to draw and to paint. And when I was in kindergarten, they had us dress up as what we wanted to be when we were older. And I dressed up as an artist, and I had an artist palette and all of that sort of thing. And then my dad died when I was 10, and it made music really difficult for me for about 15 years. I quit singing, and I kind of distanced myself from that kind of creativity. And it was only in the past couple of years that I discovered handpan and found myself drawn to that creative part of myself that I had neglected for so long.
Wow. I had no idea. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you went through a rough patch there in your relationship to music and art.
Yeah, it was interesting to have something that had brought me so much joy as a child to be something that was tinged with sadness.
Yeah.
And, for me, that happened when I was a kid. And so often children don't know how to process trauma and process things that hurt. And, I did what I think a lot of children do, which is I just pushed it away.
Yeah. Did you maintain some other artistic outlets like drawing in the meantime?
I didn't. I did find theater
Okay.
in the theater community in high school and in college. And, those communities tend to be full of creative, quirky, fun people. And I never was someone who wanted to be on stage, but I was a stage manager and I helped with lighting and things like that. And that was good.
Yeah, and it sounds like theater brings in a whole new aspect of the art being community too, right?
Mhm.
And performance. And so what drew you to the handpan? How did you discover the handpan and what attracted you to it when you did?
So I found handpan by watching someone play. And it was actually someone who is now a good friend of mine, Lawson Yeager. And he was busking at this little community in San Antonio called the Pearl. And I walked by and I heard this magical sound and was fully distracted by it because I believe I was walking on my way to somewhere to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even remember what now because I sat down and I make malas, which are meditation beads.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had one with me and he was playing on the end of a bench and I sat at the other end of the bench and worked on knotting my mala and just listened to him play for about 45 minutes. And I found the sound to just be enchanting and calming and grounding and exhilarating all at the same time. And I remember feeling really bad because I didn't have any cash. And so I went up to him and I was like, "Hey, can I get you a coffee?" Because he was playing right outside of a coffee shop. And he was like, "Yeah, that would be great." So I got him a coffee and went on my way, and it stuck with me. And a couple of months later, I made a new friend who busks often, and he plays didgeridoo and djembe and a few other instruments, and he had a handpan. And he let me play. And the first time I sat down with it, I think I sat there playing for 2 hours.
Mm.
And I'd never played a percussion instrument before. It wasn't a thing that I had any training with, and I remember so much joy. I just felt joy when I was playing, and it was funny because we were outside, like we were busking. He was busking when I did this, and so there were people walking by, and I thought about it afterwards, and there wasn't a moment where I was self-conscious or felt odd about people watching me play, despite the fact that, I didn't really have any idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered telling him, when I first started playing, I looked up at him and I said, "It sounds like fairies singing."
Mm.
And I still with handpans, I like to find a description of their tone or something about them that is a little more whimsical and more fairy tale like, because I think I'm drawn to that quality in them.
Yeah, and you're not the only one. I think a lot of us are drawn to the magic of this sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you use the word joy because kind of the tagline for this podcast is the simple joy of creating.
Mm.
And joy is this powerful thing because it implies the absence of fear. And you just described it, right? Busking, being out in public and playing and not being fearful of doing it wrong or not being fearful of what others are going to think. And
Mm-hmm.
this kind of freedom from fear produces so much joy. But it's so cool that you had this experience. And I had no idea that it was Lawson who introduced you to the handpan. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it was. And it's great because now he and I play together, at least once a week, often more.
Yeah, I've seen a number of recent videos of the two of you playing duets, and it's really neat that you seem to have a great chemistry and that you can make music together.
Hmm. It's been a really beautiful thing to create with him and to grow in that together.
Hmm. Yeah, he's a great guy, and he's going to be on the podcast at some point in the near future.
Yes, I hope so.
All right, so I missed it, but yesterday was National Teacher Appreciation Day, so I'm sorry I'm one day late, but cheers to you and to all the teachers who have impacted us. This is partly why we're chatting today about the topic of handpans in education. You're an educator, you're a teacher. How did you celebrate yesterday?
Well, so the whole week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and I've kind of just been celebrating by doing what I usually do with the kids. This week is always a really interesting one because oftentimes other teachers in the building will prompt kids to like write little notes to their teachers for why they appreciate them and things like that. And so every year I always get like one or two cards or little letters that really stick with me.
Hmm.
And I got a really sweet one today, actually, from a student that I taught 2 years ago. And she wrote this beautiful letter about how she appreciated so much that I helped open her eyes to the world around her, is I think how she phrased it. And actually, she mentioned musical instruments in the letter because she plays ukulele. And I invite my kids to bring their instruments to class. And they can play basically any time they want. And if they get their work done or if it's something that they could do while they're still working, they're more than welcome to. And so this particular student, there were two kids in her class that also played ukulele. And so they would bring them and they would work on things together. And she mentioned in her letter that she appreciated, being able to do that in my class, which was really nice.
Yeah, that's really cute. So what ages are your students? What grade?
Yeah, I teach sixth graders. So they are 11 and 12 years old for the most part.
Okay. And so that's kind of a crazy age, right?
Yeah, they're a little up and down.
A lot is going on. They're being introduced to a world of options and subject matters, and they're being introduced to the handpan through you.
Hmm.
So I understand you've brought your handpans to class to introduce it to your students, to have them try it. Share some observations that you've had of their experience.
Yeah. So it's interesting when I'm playing for them, which I'll bring my pan and I'll play if they're taking a test or quizzes, or if it's a quiet work day. There aren't very many of those days in my class. I'm the teacher that likes things to be a little bit rowdy. But days when it's quiet, I'll bring the handpan and play for them, and they immediately fall completely silent if someone starts to talk or do something that's kind of disruptive. The other kids will shush them. It's cute when I'll have it with me when the kids walk in. They recognize the case and they recognize the pan and they know what it is and they'll get excited. And I have kids who have said that it's really calming. Usually that's the word that they use when I'm playing, is that it's really calming and it helps them breathe. I had a student say that it helped remind him to breathe, which I thought was really special. And so just kind of as background sound for them, the kids really like it. I've also used it with kids who were having a tough day, who were angry about something or sad about something or anxious about something.
Mm-hmm.
And those circumstances I have found to be really powerful. So I have had some kids where, I'll have them sit on the ground and I'll bring the pan to them and I'll put it in their lap. And if I haven't already shown them how to play it, I'll, kind of explain how to play, and then I'll just leave it with them. and I'll tell them, like, just take 5 minutes, make some music, do you, and leave them to it. And that has been a really powerful tool for some of my kids. I had a student last year, her name's Izzy, and she had some tough things going on at home, and I knew a lot about that context, and she trusted me enough to confide in me, which I was very appreciative of. And she had a couple of days where she just couldn't concentrate in class. And that happens sometimes because, kids have lives outside of school, and sometimes those lives make doing school impossible. And so she was one kid that I let her sit in the hallway, and I brought her the pan, and I just left her out there with it for 5 or 10 minutes. And I popped back out in the hallway, and she looked up at me. I didn't even have to say anything. She looked up and she said, "Miss Mosley, I feel so calm." And it was an immediate, like, straight shot to the heart. It's like, oh, good. Okay. It worked. I'm happy.
Good on you for trusting her and for being so generous and for empowering her to experience the instrument. I'm really impressed by that, but I think what you did there and what you do on a routine basis is really powerful because you trust them and you empower them.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I do have a lot of trust with my kids. And I think that part of that is, it's with handpan especially, I always introduce the instrument to them, and I tell them a little bit about the history of it, and I show them how to play it, and I tell them how expensive they are. And I'm like, this is a $2,400 instrument. It's very expensive, and it's very special to me. And, I also am upfront with them that it is something that for me has helped me deal with my emotions, and that it's something that helps me find joy, and that it's something that if they would like to try, like I'm happy for them too, but, they need to be careful. And, by and large, when kids have all of the information and they understand what something is and why it's important and how to handle it, they're very careful and they're very respectful. And honestly, they're like excited to be trusted in that way. Like they take it seriously that an adult and someone that they have a relationship with has something that's special that they want to share.
Mm-hmm. Which makes it an all the more meaningful connection for you, but also for their own development and for them to perhaps develop a passion and come to own an interest for themselves, right? There's always this point in this transition from childhood to becoming adults where we no longer just do things that were passed on to us, but we start owning them for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't be surprised if this sense of ownership happens through meaningful connections and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like some of the students that you've introduced to the handpan have taken it to heart or are wanting to go farther than other kids?
It's kind of hard to say because for middle schoolers, so often their interests are still in so many directions that what they're going to hone in on is still a little uncertain. But I do have some kids that every time I bring my pan with me, they always want to play. I've had a few kids ask like where they can get one. And so I, will give them information about, things that they can look at in different makers, and, tell them the names that they can search for. And, I have a few kids who have come to me and said, oh, Miss Mosley, I looked at some handpan videos the other night. I watched them for a few hours, and So for those kids, the ones that ask questions and then they go home and do something with it, I think that those kids might, pick it up later on. But I have been surprised and impressed by the number of students who have said to me, like, I'm not good at things like this, or I'm not creative, or I'm not talented, or I'm not musical. And then they'll sit with my handpan and like diligently play and work at it for half an hour. And for those kids, I hope that even if it's not handpan, that they begin to understand themselves as creative.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's not an instrument, even if it's not music, that they see that they are that they can create, and that is a powerful thing. This year, it's been fun. I have an advisory class. So normally I teach world culture and geography. That's my content.
Mm-hmm.
And so I teach 5 sections of that, and then I have one advisory class. And my advisory class, we've spoken a lot about creativity, and I've done lessons on creativity and how that can be a lot of different things. And we've talked about how young kids will embrace the idea of themselves as creative, and then by the time we get to adults, we have somehow started to think that we're not. And so I have a day every week that is just creativity day. And they can do whatever it is that they are drawn to as far as, a creator. And I'll bring the handpan sometimes on those days for kids to play. And there was one day that sticks out where one of my kids, Hannah, she said, "Oh, I'm not good at this sort of thing." And I sat her down with 2 other kids, Noah and Mustafa, and the 3 of them sat there, and they legit composed a song over the course of half an hour. I mean, they're 11, and they sat there, and they all had different parts, and they had 4/4 rhythm that they had figured out. And it was so cool to watch Hannah, though, because she told me at the beginning, like, I'm not good at this. And I showed her how to play it. And over the course of that half hour, her touch got so much better. And the sounds that she was getting from the pan were like beautiful and resonant, and like she was so particular. And the other 2 guys, they were, they weren't banging on the handpan, because none of the kids ever do, because they know not to. But they were definitely not as perhaps elegant or methodical about their approach as she was.
Yeah.
And it was so cool. Like, it's cool to watch kids get better at something that they didn't think that they could do.
That's such a great story. I think it makes us all think about our childhood and maybe moments where the light bulb went on. It's cool that the handpan can play a role in providing an alternative, a different outlet for kids to express themselves and perhaps find confidence or just interest, because that's a big part of personal development, right? Like, I think when we look back in our own lives, there are these pivotal moments that helped us to come out of our shell. And it sounds like the handpan would be very well suited for the school setting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an instrument that has a very low entry barrier, since it's tuned to a scale, and it's really quite difficult to make sounds with it that don't sound beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's much less intimidating, I think, than an instrument like a guitar or piano even. And a lot of the instruments that kids encounter in band or orchestra classes, it's, you can hand a kid a handpan, And within 10 minutes, they can be creating something that is theirs, that is completely their own, that sounds beautiful. And I think that one, is great for kids for that reason. But then I think it's good for schools because of the reason mentioned earlier about giving kids a tool to help manage their emotions and giving kids like even just background noise that is calming. One of the things that I see a lot in my middle schoolers is they get angry and they don't know how to communicate that that is what's happening to them. They don't know how to feel emotions that don't feel good. And the way that they respond is to try to get away from that emotion. And, that's either by closing off or by getting violent. And I think handpan is a great tool to get kids to like sit and focus and just be for a minute.
Yeah.
And then they're able to have conversations about what's happening with their emotions. A lot of times, the adult has to be the one to stay calm when children are not.
Mhm.
And, sometimes that's difficult for adults and kids too. It's like when you get anger or frustration or any of the emotions that like don't feel good involved, it makes it difficult to teach. It makes it difficult to learn. And so handpan, I think, has been a tool for me just in like remembering. It teaches me focus. It teaches me how to be calm. And then with my kids, it teaches them how to focus. It teaches them how to be calm. And, schools need more tools that can facilitate that process. And it's actually something when I first started bringing my handpan to work, my principal, he is an amazing administrator and he calls it the turtle. And I remember one day I was teaching and I had a student teacher at the time and she was leading the class that day. And my principal, pops in my room and he opens the door and he goes, "Mosley, you got the turtle today?" Yes, sir, I do. He was like, "Cool, grab it, come with me." So, okay. So I leave my student teacher with my classroom and, have the handpan go with the principal. And he takes me to the BMC room, which is the classroom for students who have emotional and behavioral disorders. And some students are in there the whole day. Some just go there like when they need support. And my principal wanted me to play for the kids. Like it was a kind of stressful day. They were having a tough day. And he saw that as a tool to like help the kids decompress a little bit. So I sat there and played my handpan for some kids for a little while. And it was nice for me to see the instrument valued for all the different things that it can do. I can see a world where a school administrator would not be okay with a teacher bringing their instrument to work and playing it for kids.
Right.
And that has never been my experience, and I'm grateful for that.
I really like what you shared about the instrument being an outlet for kids to express their emotions. Because, sometimes I think from an outside perspective, we tend to see kids' issues as not adult problems. But when you think about it, I think a lot of children go through a lot more emotional stress and anxiety than adults do, partly because they don't have the tools to process their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's counterintuitive, but they might be the population that needs a tool like that the most to process just the rejection and the bullies and all the trauma that can surface during childhood.
Absolutely. Even if it's not handpan, even if it's not an instrument, the power of creativity to help people process things that are difficult is unmatched, I think, by most anything else. To really process and deal with something, you have to look at it. You have to see it, you have to feel it, and doing so without like a mediator is hard.
Hmm.
And I think creativity can be a really beautiful mediator. And, I have a lot of kids who will journal or they'll draw or they'll make music or they'll do something that is creative in nature that makes something new, to help them deal with things that are hard. And I totally agree with you that children deal with so much emotional stress in a way that adults don't, because kids don't have the tools yet. And so often children are treated like their concerns aren't important or their concerns aren't valid because they are kids.
Hmm.
But I think back to my experiences as a child, and there was a lot that was overwhelming, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and no one taught me how to deal with it. And now as an adult, I finally figured out how to deal with the things that I didn't know how to deal with when I was 10 or 11.
As adults, maybe it's cultural, but these days it seems like the culture is trying to retrieve that childlike innocence, reintroducing playtime, simplifying our lives. Um, so we have a lot to learn from children and their approach to the world, including something like the handpan.
Oh, absolutely.
The curiosity, sort of bypassing fear and status. These are all things that we can learn from.
Oh, and they definitely bypass fear. Like, I love watching the kids with handpan because now it's funny because somewhere along the way, I became more fearful about playing publicly with my handpan. It's like I think I started to learn more, and then I was like, oh, well, I'm not that good, so maybe I should, play less in public. I don't know. But my kids, it's like they are not concerned about that at all. They Every time I watch them play, it's like, oh, I remember that. Like I remember just the joy from playing. And I always try to stay cognizant of that, of like how much joy I get from playing my instrument. And, when fear starts to creep in, it's like, shoo it off.
Yeah. That resonates with me a lot. I think with a lot of people. Like, when you first discover the handpan, you even said it about one of the kids. They go home and they watch YouTube for 3 hours and
Yeah.
they get pumped. Their passion is increased by that. Fast forward a few years of playing, you end up sort of comparing yourself to the top players and you feel bad about your own playing. Right. It's the same act of watching YouTube, but we just let in fear and we lose that freedom which we had and that joy which we had in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, the kids definitely just see potential. They watch those, are like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. Let me figure out how to do that. And it's really fun to watch. Even, teaching kids every once in a while, I'll play just like a simple like 2-note 4/4, and I'll, have them count with me, and then I'll have them, like start adding like polyrhythms, and it's really cool to watch how quickly kids pick up on rhythm, basic things about music theory. I think handpan is a great instrument to just play and go into without even being concerned about any of that. But it's also cool how much kids are interested in learning the more concrete things about playing the instrument. They're sponges. And like you said earlier, there's so much curiosity. And it's a thing, even when I'm busking, even if it's not my students, kids are always the ones that I'm excited to see. And I always wave them over. It's like I stop playing. It's like, come here. And if they're interested, I tell them, like, you can play. Like, here's how you play. And they're my favorite audience to play for, always. And it's not because they are interested in what I am playing. It's because they're interested in the instrument.
Yeah.
And I'm always excited to show it to them. I find myself most excited to play and most joyful about my playing when I approach it that way. And I always approach it that way with children, which is perhaps why they're my favorite audience.
That's inspiring to hear, and it makes me want to try to pursue more of that. I know I have a gig at a library coming up in a few weeks, and there will be kids, so I'm going to be particularly mindful to try to interact with them and share the joy and see their reaction.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
I love libraries. I just finished my master's in library science. So I also have a deep love for libraries and reading. And I'm happy that you're taking your handpan there.
Yeah. I mean, for all handpan players out there, library gigs are awesome because it's educative, it's family friendly. It's so much better than performing at a bar where everyone's rowdy and loud. You've got a fun, interested audience with people sticking around at the end and asking questions and trying instruments. I've really enjoyed these kinds of settings.
Oh yeah, and kids are so often the ones who come up afterwards and want to talk to me. You may have seen Lawson and I got to play in a cave.
Yeah.
Like about 2 months ago. And I've played in that same cave a couple of other times. And 2 of the 3 times I've had kids come up like immediately afterwards and their parents saying that they were just mesmerized by the handpan and, what is it called and the history of it and things like that. And it's fun because for kids, it's so often new. It's like handpan is still rare enough that so many of them have never even seen one.
Yeah. Yeah, and who knows what they're going to do with the instrument. They're going to take it to the next level.
Yeah. And, for the little ones, I know sometimes people get a little anxious about letting kids play their instrument because, they're kind of, the instrument's kind of delicate and kids can be indelicate sometimes. But I rarely have that happen. And any time that I do, I just flip it over.
Yeah.
And, let them play, let them drum on the bottom of it. And usually too, if kids are hitting too hard or anything, I'll just explain you need to hit it softer, and then they do, and it's fine.
You should teach workshops at gatherings to equip us with the skills that it takes to introduce the handpan to kids without freaking out when they play too hard, and thus writing off possibly a great interaction between the child and this musical instrument. But instead having a balanced approach where everyone's happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would be happy to do that. I'm happy to talk about handpan and kids anytime. But it really is, that kids, it's like especially little ones, they always look to adults about what to do. And when they make a misstep, just correct them. And then usually they'll do what they're supposed to. And, I've never had an interaction with a kid where I was like very concerned that my handpan was going to be injured.
Yeah. I have, but I'm a little paranoid.
Yeah, I'm not terribly protective of my instruments. I don't guess, but nothing terrible has happened yet. So
Yeah, and that's the thing. I agree with that. And ultimately, we don't want to be grouchy and holding on tight to our possessions and our creative tools. It's always better to share the music and to share the gifts that we've received.
hmm
So I definitely appreciate your insight into this whole side of the instrument.
I'm glad that I could share. I learned so much from my kids, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share the things that they teach me.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you're placed there, and I'll be in touch with more questions in the future because this is neat. And I know that it'll be a good conversation just to have in the community. So thanks so much for taking the time. What are you going to do with the rest of Teacher Appreciation Week?
Oh goodness. I don't actually know. No particular plans. I think the administration at my school, they're providing breakfast for us tomorrow. It's funny, all the teacher appreciation things tend toward the food gifts variety. So like we had a trail mix bar today and nachos on Monday and stuff like that. But yeah, I am usually surprised every year by gifts from my kids. They are very thoughtful and they're very sweet, and that's always my favorite part of this week is just the things that the kids have to say and gifts that I get from them. It's a nice, yeah, it's just a nice thing. It's a nice week.
Well, it sounds like you're an awesome teacher, Mary. So thanks again for spending time on the Handpan podcast to share your experience. I really appreciate you. And yeah, we'll be in touch again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sylvan. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and that you felt encouraged. As you can tell by her genuine enthusiasm, it sure seems like Mary has found her calling as an educator. And the handpan has become a part of that. I believe there isn't one model to follow or one box to fit into. Not everyone is supposed to be on stage performing, but everyone has a unique story and so much value to bring to the table. So think about what makes you, you, and maximize that. If you'd like to dive deeper into the themes we explore on this podcast, you can join our Facebook group, the Handpan Podcast Community. And if you'd like to help support the show, you can get really cool merch at thehandpanpodcast.com and click merch. The most popular design is an illustration of a green alien playing the handpan. It's available on t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, shower curtains, and more. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and talk to you in the next one.